You're listening to Three Kitchens Podcast, a member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. Now let's get cooking. This episode is brought to you by Park Power, your friendly local utilities provider in Alberta, offering internet, electricity, and natural gas with low rates, awesome service, and profit sharing with local charities. In Alberta, you get to choose where to buy your internet, electricity, and natural gas. Park Power has low overhead, which in turn allows them to offer low competitive rates. Reach out for a no-obligation comparison by emailing estimates at parkpower.ca. If you decide to switch, it's easy. It's really just a change to your billing, and you can feel good knowing you are helping to give back to our communities with your utility bills. Learn more at parkpower.ca. Welcome to Three Kitchens. Erin, are you ready to go?
I'm so here. I'm ready.
You're here for it.
Here for it.
Let's do this.
I am totally here for this episode. Even just going through the audio again, I'm just so pumped.
I know. Yeah. So everybody, we're talking about gardening. And you may think like, gardening? Why are we talking about that on our favorite food podcast? Well, because you may want to grow the food you eat, which is so satisfying.
Yeah, I know it's something that my kids, they will eat so much more if it comes to our garden.
Oh,
is this our zucchini? Munch, 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 munch. They'll
nice.
just go help themselves to carrots out of the garden.
Mm-hmm.
They pick the chives and run around smelling like onions, which I think your guys do too.
Mine do too, yeah. I'm always like, who's been in the chives?
But we connected with Karin Velez of the Just Grow Something podcast.
I know, I started listening to her and we thought, well, who better to come on our show and tell our listeners how they can grow food that they can cook with in their own kitchen.
Yeah, and she makes things so approachable, even for somebody who is a long-term gardener. I learned so much from her, from just some of the basic things that she shares that I'm like, oh, I didn't know I should be doing that, or I could be doing that. She's got fabulous amount of information that she is so passionate about and wants to share with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
She started out just gardening on the side of her house.
Yeah, to feed her family. Yeah.
And now she's got a fairly large operation, an acreage.
40-acre market farm. That's huge. It's huge. Her podcast is called Just Grow Something. And she also does consulting in her local area. She does courses. She has some online gardening planning courses.
Yeah.
She is here to help everybody grow food, even just a pot on your windowsill. Yeah. So whether you've got a garden or you just want to grow something in your house or on your back deck, Karin has tons of information to help you do that.
And we've got some really approachable things that you can plan the meal you want to make with your garden this year and how to sort of take that on for this spring season, because for us more northern people, it may not look like spring out there, but it is just around the corner, baby.
I like the optimism. It's hard to see right now, but
it is. But now's the time.
Yeah. Well, you can start planning. If you want to grow from seed, you can start getting seeds and getting things going. So
yeah,
it is in some places where Karin is. She's already digging in the dirt.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about specific recipes with Karin, but we thought we would offer up some salad.
I've got a simple tossed green salad that's got a tasty vinaigrette with it, and you can make it with fresh citrus, a little bit of cheese, and some nuts. And it's quick and easy to whip up any night that you just want to put a salad on the side. And if you've got salad or lettuces from your garden, it's a surefire way to put those on your plate. And we also talk about planting tomato and basil together because they're apparently good friends in the garden. And so I've also got a quinoa salad that has tomato and basil with a balsamic vinaigrette.
It's yummy.
Great, gluten-free. It makes a wicked packable lunch.
It's really delicious. And then I made an antipasto farro salad with a sun-dried tomato vinaigrette. And it's like it's like a meal. Farro is like a grain. It's kind of a little bit like barley. Mm-hmm. In fact, you could swap out if you prefer quinoa or brown rice or barley or something like that in there. And there's salami, there's fresh mozzarella, olives and all kinds of sun-dried tomatoes, all kinds of yummy stuff in that salad. So
Uh-oh.
we're both unstable.
This is the story of our lives.
But
You are
don't
both
worry.
unstable. Oh, God. The truth
salads
is out.
are good. Don't worry. We may be unstable, but the recipes
food and the
are solid.
recipes are good. Yeah.
And so is Karin. Karin
Yeah.
is...
Yeah, if you've been curious about getting into gardening, if you do garden already and you're starting to hit that point where like, things are different this year, or I want to up my game, Karin is a fantastic resource and she's got great information. She highlights it throughout the week on her Instagram, and she does little focal points on Fridays where she gets deep into like one small topic so that you can really get a deeper dive into some of the issues or problems that you're having in your garden or how to remedy those things.
So thank you, Karin. Really appreciate it. We're really excited for this one and hope everyone enjoys. Just grow something, everybody. Just grow something.
And just grow something. I love how she says that.
I know.
It's like, yes, just grow something. Anything.
Anything. And then eat it.
And then eat it and enjoy.
Yep.
Well, hi, Karin, and welcome to the podcast. We are really looking forward to having you here today to get us and our listeners excited about the upcoming gardening season, because we have both sat here and talked for a few minutes before we started about the snow.
Absolutely. I am so excited to be like the third kitchen today. Thank you guys for having me here.
Yay! We love when a third kitchen can join us.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you got into gardening and how this has evolved sort of into this podcast and teaching platform where you're teaching others how to grow a garden?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first garden was a little corner behind a shed in my suburban backyard. And the only reason I even started it was because one of my kids came home from school and said that she and all of her friends were boycotting the school lunches because they said they were gross. And could she please start packing her own lunch? I wasn't going to discourage her. I mean, if she felt like the lunches were gross, I wasn't going to force her to eat that, but I had to figure out some way to like, if I'm going to let you pack your lunch, that's obviously going to cost me more. Where else in the food budget can I save some money? Let me throw a garden out there and I'll at least grow some of our, our vegetables and stuff that we eat for dinner, which is what I did. And I had zero clue what I was doing. I literally put up like this little lattice work fence just to keep the dog out of it, and spat a few packets of seeds and threw them out there and said, okay, grow, do your thing, And half of it was a miserable failure, but half of it was a resounding success. So we got lucky and we got to, harvest something off of that. And the kids thought it was cool and I thought it was cool, and it was like, okay, we can do this. This is kind of fun and this is easy. Why not? Fast forward a couple of years and we moved to a 5-acre plot outside of city limits and kind of started our little family homestead, I guess. And the idea was, okay, well, now I'm married and I've got a total of 6 kids in this house and I need to be feeding them as much as possible with what we're doing ourselves. So yeah. So that shed that I had planted that garden behind actually moved with us and became a chicken coop immediately. That little corner garden turned into a 1/4 of an acre that I planted, and which eventually expanded to like a full 1/2 acre. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The look on your face right now. Yeah. I went from a little tiny, it was probably 4 foot by 6 foot to a 1/4 acre. That's just my MO. I mean, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, right?
Go big or go home.
Exactly. And I still had no idea what I was doing. None whatsoever, and just thought, okay, well, we're going to plant this stuff. And we did. And it grew phenomenally well. At that point, I thought, well, okay, why does everybody think that this is so hard? This is so easy. It's growing.
Sure.
Like, I'm just throwing the seeds out there. What's the problem? Yeah. So I got so big into my britches that I thought I was the world's best gardener. And a year after starting this garden, I decided that I wanted to do this for other people too. And we started a farm business to supply fruits and vegetables to like 15 families, a community supported agriculture program. And it just went on from there. And it was like the second or third year when I finally realized, oh, I have no idea what I'm doing, because all of a sudden then the weeds started coming in and the bugs started coming in, because of course that first garden was fantastic. We were planting into what used to be cattle pasture.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. So it had so many nutrients, just from
Right.
being naturally fertilized all those years. And I knew nothing about, oh, well, I'm taking this nutrition out of the soil. I need to be putting it back in again. Wasn't
Right.
buying fertilizer because there was no money for that stuff anyway. I didn't have money to go and buy fertilizer, so it was like, all right, well, I'm just going to keep planting. I knew nothing about crop rotation. So the weeds, the bugs, the diseases, all of that stuff started to rear its ugly head. And I suddenly had to figure out what on earth I was doing, because now not only was I feeding my family, but I had customers, and we had continued to sort of expand this farm business of ours. So now there were other people who were relying on me. So the education of Farmer Karin very quickly did. And I started trying to figure out what to do. And it was at that point that I realized, that phrase, you don't know what you don't know.
Oh, totally. That's me every day.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah. And you start getting into this and it's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Oh my gosh, I had no idea. It was definitely an eye-opening experience. And then I realized that I was not the only one by far that just thought, okay, you go out there, you throw the seeds out there and it grows. And then you just come back and you pick it. Like that's what, growing things is, right? No. We continued to expand. I went back to school. I went and got my degree in horticulture to help the farm business, to figure out what we were doing. And somewhere along the way, I decided that I needed to share the information that I had learned, starting as a small home gardener and then continuing to expand, and everything that I had sort of learned along the way, and teach other people how to do the same thing for themselves so that they don't go through 3, 4, 5 years of struggling, trying to figure out what to do, how to fix this problem, how to get this better crop, how to just fit all of it in, to a small garden space. And so that's when I was like, all right, I'm going to do a podcast. I want to start teaching classes. I want to start, going to people's homes and showing them, what to do and how to do it, and just sort of make that my mission, because I figured out there is so much power in food and knowing how to grow even just a little bit of something yourself. It tastes better. It's more nutritious for you. All of those things when it's coming right out of your own garden. And so I've just sort of made that my mission. It's like, okay, I'm going to teach you how to grow something. I don't care if it's in your windowsill. I'm going to teach you what to do. So that's me in a nutshell. Yeah.
I love that. And I feel like I've already just learned something personally myself listening to that, because I'm hitting year 5 in a garden that hadn't been touched for many years until we moved into the house. The first few years, I was like, wow, this is amazing. My garden is so easy. I just plant and pick. And I had gardened a lot before and was like, wow, why has it never been this easy? But now it's getting tougher, and I have to start doing some more learning now so that I get better results out of my garden and continue to treat it the best way to get the most out of it.
Yeah, I think that's the learning curve, is figuring out, okay, what are you working with? Never underestimate the power of a soil test. To just figure out what it is that you're working with, and then what is it that you're planting, and what is that plant is pulling out of the soil. That nutrition is what we're aiming for, right? We want that plant to be its healthiest, best version of itself, because we are going to eat that plant, and we want to be our healthiest, best version of ourselves. And so that's the only way that works. If the plant is growing in something that is void of the nutrients that it needs, then we are also going to be missing those nutrients. And that's sort of where that whole circle comes in, and paying attention to everything goes back to the soil and how good is our soil. Something might grow, and it might grow with just having the minimum amounts of fertility in that soil. But that does not mean that it's going to be nutritionally sound for us when we eat it. At that point, it might as well just be filler.
Interesting. So if you're looking at starting to plant a garden because you want to eat out of it, you really have to start looking at what that soil is. If I'm just starting out, do I want to think about a container garden? Do I want to be thinking about a raised bed or something in the ground? For our listeners who are thinking about starting a garden to eat out of, what's the easiest way to start getting into that? Because that's all the soil stuff is overwhelming.
Yeah, it is. And it doesn't have to be. I would always say if you're trying to make the decision between whether or not you're going to plant in ground or you're going to plant in like raised containers or planters, do a simple soil test.
Okay.
Wherever it is that you think you're going to plant. You can just use the simple off-the-shelf ones at the garden center, in your local hardware store, or whatever. Those are perfectly fine. It doesn't have to be fancy.
Okay.
The instructions are very clear on how to do it. It's going to give you 4 different pieces of information. Your levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are our 3 macronutrients that all plants need to grow with. And then it's also going to tell you what the pH of your soil is, how acidic or alkaline it is. That is another little piece of information that a lot of folks don't realize is important depending on what it is that you're trying to grow. Because if your soil is too acidic or too alkaline, there is a large number of plants that are not going to be able to grow in that soil. But those 4 pieces of information are going to get you off to the right start. If your soil is completely depleted, you have 2 options. You can either choose to amend with compost and, all kinds of different amendments and stuff that are going to add that nutrition back into the soil. Or you can choose at that point that you want to just go for a raised bed or a planter where you are completely controlling what you fill it with. Part of that is something that I overlooked for a very, very long time, which is doing a soil composition test. It sounds really scary and fancy, but it's super easy. You can do it with a mason jar and some water. You are looking to see how much sand, silt, and clay is in your soil. The combination of those 3 is what gives your soil its texture. It sounds like it's complicated, but it really is 2 very simple tests that you can do at the very, very beginning of your gardening journey, and that will help you to know what it is that you're working with and which direction to go. So that's definitely a first step for sure.
Yes, I was just listening to this.
She was just geeking out over
frozen dirt.
Totally. Just before you joined us this morning, she's like, "Oh, Heather, have you listened to this?" And I can't wait to do the test and do the pyramid and the whole thing. She was totally nerding out. Erin's a scientist.
I love that.
I have a background in ecology.
You're speaking her language, Karin.
I'm hoping that, it makes sense too, though, to people who don't have that sort of science geek, inner person like we do. It's like, I hope that home gardeners who are just, hearing this for the first time hear that it is beneficial to know that information to be able to go out and do it, because it really does solve so many problems just right off the bat. You're so much more informed about what you can do, or what you should be doing. So knowing what you're working with is just like the biggest key to the entire equation. It's fantastic.
The mason jar test that you spoke about, that wasn't something that I had ever learned. Like, everything to do with laboratory science is laboratory science. It wasn't accessible or handed over to the everyday person. So I understand what a soil triangle is, but I had no idea how to figure out what I've got and apply it to where I am. So that simple test of a mason jar, soap and water, I can't wait to get out and dig in the dirt.
I think you got some time to wait. But while we wait, Karin, you have started a course where you help people plan their garden. And I said to Erin, "Oh man, this is what I need. I need someone to tell me the steps. I've got this many pots on my back deck. I have a small bed. I have a yard full of fruit bushes. I can grow berries like nobody's business, but what can I put in with them? And how can I level this up and not just grow? I can grow a tomato plant. I can grow peas, but what else can I do?" And I think this is where people, maybe you dabble a little bit, but you're not really sure how to level it up. What can I put with my tomato plant to make use of that small space I've got?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. And that is, you're right. It is one of the things that a lot of gardeners get hung up on, because you see these images of traditional farms or idealistic, picture perfect gardens where everything is in beautiful straight rows, and it's just, you've got your row of tomatoes, you have your row of green beans, you have your row of peas, and it's all perfectly clear in between. First of all, that's a little unrealistic for most home gardeners. Not everybody has the amount of time that it takes to spend in your garden all day long, making sure it's completely weeded, making sure that everything is perfectly aligned, and making sure that everything is beautifully trellised. Okay, let's just be realistic about it. Secondly, that is still considered a monocrop. We think about monocropping in terms of farming, where all you have is just a single field full of just one specific crop, say it's corn or it's soy or it's wheat or whatever. And we've heard about how detrimental that can be. It's one single target for the pests to go after.
Yeah.
When you have a polyculture, you have multiple plants planted together. And what it does is it makes it to where the insect pests are confused. If you have a bunch of other stuff planted around it that are not host plants for that insect, it's going to confuse that chemical signal and make it harder for that insect to find. So that's number one. Number two is we don't want bare soil. If you are planting one thing and you're leaving all of that space underneath open, you are encouraging the soil to erode. You're encouraging the root zone of the plants to heat up more than it needs to, which is also causing more of water loss as well. At the bare minimum, you absolutely would want it to be mulching. But a good way to do that and also get an additional crop out of it is to plant something else underneath it that you would also eat. So we call this intercropping. And it can be done both as a space saving technique, as a way to conserve moisture, and also as a way to help with some pest prevention. The things to think about when you're talking about intercropping is the way that they grow. So usually you want to plant something that's tall, like in the overstory, and then pair it with something that is shorter that will grow in the understory. The other thing that they do is they grow at different rates. So what we want to look at in our garden is, what can I have in this bed now that it vacates that bed and allows me to put something else in? And can they have any overlap? So one of my favorite things to do is I will start my lettuces in one bed. And as the head lettuces start to come to maturity, I will transplant my tomato seedlings in between those rows of the lettuce plants. So they're not competing with each other for nutrients, because that's the third component. You want to make sure that they're not pulling the same nutrients at the same time, so you're not depleting that soil. I mean, you can, but then you would really have to be feeding them a lot. So for a hands-off approach, try to make sure they're not competing with each other. As the lettuce comes to maturity, those tomatoes are starting to grow up and over top. So by the time the tomatoes are so big that they're going to be shading those lettuces to where they don't get enough sun, it's time to harvest the lettuce. So now the tomato has its full room that it needs in order to grow. And you throw some mulch down underneath there to protect the bottom of those plants. And you can trim up the bottoms underneath, because you want to be doing that anyway to get rid of any diseased leaves or anything else. Well, now you've got a shady spot. You can go ahead and plant lettuces back into that again. So you've just gotten 3 crops out of one bed just by kind of intercropping and succession planting them. And you can do this with all kinds of things. We do it with peas and planting spinach underneath. There's all kinds of different ways. You can just tuck things in wherever they will fit. Onions are fantastic for this. You can tuck them into the different spaces in between crops. You can also do this just based on maturity rate, and you can do it within the same row or the same bed. So you've protected the soil the whole time because something has been there. You're not losing anything to erosion. You're also, shading and crowding out any weed pressure. You're conserving the moisture, but you're not impacting the plants themselves. Making sure that you're checking your soil fertility at the beginning of the season and know what you're working with. And then also make sure that you're adding nutrients back in as you're pulling these crops out. The one thing that you do want to pay attention to, though, is to make sure that careful about planting things that are in the same plant family. Not a great idea without also having something else in there that's going to help to deter those pests.
This is what I'd like to try and accomplish this year. Is I've been reading and looking at lots to do with planting your corn and your beans and your squashes together.
3 sisters.
Yeah, kind of trying to get that balance in the garden.
Yeah, anytime that you can plant things together that have some sort of benefit to each other. So the reason for planting the beans with the corn is that beans are a legume, and legumes will fix nitrogen into the soil. They have nodules on their roots that pull nitrogen from the air. So essentially they're providing themselves their own nitrogen, but some of that also gets put back into the soil, which by the way is actually done best at the end of the season. So don't pull those bean plants, just chop them down and leave the roots, and that will release that nitrogen back in. It also creates more biomass. So that's just a tip there. There are very specific things that you do not want to plant together, but other than those instances, everything else, as far as I'm concerned, is fair game. if one of your goals for your garden is to get more out of it, then having it down on paper and sort of planning it out ahead of time is the most beneficial way to do that. You can sort of create yourself a timeline of your garden, whether it's, your pots or your beds or whatever it is. The benefit to having it written down and also putting it on a calendar is that you don't forget. It takes a lot of stress out of it, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And also pay attention to how much sun you have where you're growing, especially in the city. It can change year to year. So you have to kind of pay attention to how much sun you're getting, because some things like sun and some things don't.
Yeah. And that's the benefit of keeping a garden journal from year to year. Things do change. And so when you go out and you first start thinking about planting your garden, if you can take some time to observe the space, and I get it. I mean, you don't want to wait a full year before you start planting something. So, it's going to be an educated guess the first year, but do take some time each part of the growing season to take a look at how much sun certain parts of your yard or your deck or your patio are getting and when, and how that changes throughout the season. Planting in pots and other movable type containers is very, very helpful because, I have a lot of people, oh, well, I don't have enough sun, I can't grow tomatoes. Yeah, you actually probably can, but you'll probably have to put them into a pot and be able to move them with the sun as needed. There's I think a misconception sometimes that a full sun plant needs like 10 hours a day of sun. And that's actually not the case. Generally speaking, 6 to 8 hours is fine. There are a lot of vegetables that can get away with just that 4 to 6 hour range. A lot of your herbs are in this category too. A lot of herbs can do well in just sort of part sun. If you've got listeners that live, further south or something where it gets stupid hot in the middle of the summertime, they can also use that shade to their advantage based on how much morning sun versus afternoon sun. And those sun requirements can be broken up. So it doesn't have to be 6 to 8 hours of continuous daylight. It could be you got 4 hours in the morning and then all of a sudden it's shaded all afternoon, but then you also get another 2 hours in the evening. There's 6 hours right there. Oh. It doesn't have to be all at once.
I never thought of it like that.
I never considered that timeline.
Because we have a big tree in the middle of the deck. In the morning, this side is sunny, but in the afternoon, it's shaded, which is lovely for the people. But I always wonder, like, oh no, the plants are sitting under the tree. Now it's all shady. And I try to shuffle them around, but maybe I don't need to worry so much about, right?
Yeah,
so, absolutely. Yep.
Oh, that is really interesting.
It can totally break up that sunlight requirement and do just fine.
Today's episode of Three Kitchens podcast is brought to you by the Edmonton Community Foundation. The foundation acts as a bridge between donors and charities to create a strong, vibrant community for generations to come. Anyone can start an endowment fund with the Edmonton Community Foundation. Once it reaches $10,000, it can start distributing funds. To learn more, visit ecfoundation.org. I like this idea of planting these plants together because if we wanted to think about planting a garden around a specific meal, can we have a starter bed or a pot where we could have a pizza garden or a salsa garden? Or is there a way that we can kind of think about that end point meal that we want to make and then put it all in the garden bed?
Yes. And it's absolutely a fantastically fun way to garden too. And this is especially true if you have kids. If you're gardening with kids, especially younger kids, doing a designated sort of garden theme is a fantastic way to get started in gardening. It's a great way to keep kids interested in gardening, especially if it's things that they want to eat. Doing like a pizza garden or something like that is a great way. And it goes back to that sort of intercropping and companion planting thing. So if you think about, okay, what are the components that I would need to make a pizza? Okay, then I can grow a tomato plant that is a paste tomato plant. And it's going to give me those big, thick, pasty sort of tomatoes that are great for making sauce out of. Perfect. I'm going to grow that. And then what else do I have? Oh, oregano. Okay, well, I can put oregano around in that pot. Now, oregano is a perennial and it has a tendency sometimes to take over the areas that it's planted in. So putting that in a pot is fantastic because it will keep it contained. So you can put that tomato plant in the center of that pot and go ahead and put the oregano around the base of it and allow it to kind of spill up and over.
Ooh.
Now you have two components for your tomato sauce. Garlic, another thing that you can tuck in and around because it doesn't take up a huge amount of space.
Mm-hmm.
So planting things in and around that garlic is absolutely a good idea. Onions, same thing. You can tuck the onions in, even with the toppings, your peppers and mushrooms and those sorts of things. And a lot of the time you don't need to have a ton of these plants to get what it is that you want. You don't necessarily need to be using bell peppers.
Mm-hmm.
Choose a smaller variety of pepper that's going to produce a bunch of these little snacker sized peppers, but yeah, themed gardens are a great way to sort of tuck things in, especially when you're talking about herbs and smaller, faster growing, components. So
do you grow mushrooms? Did you just mention mushrooms?
So that I have mushrooms on the brain because it's been something we've been talking about doing for a while and we have not done, but I'm getting ready to interview 2 different mushroom growers in order to be able to do a full mushroom episode, because I do have so many people asking about how to grow mushrooms. And it's something that we absolutely have considered doing here, but we just haven't made the leap yet. So we're going to have a mushroom episode because I have not grown them yet, but I do have a lot of local growers who grow a ton of them in different ways. So
I look forward to hearing you tell me all about it so I can perhaps do that in the future.
What's your best plan of action if you want to do herb gardening?
Now, herbs are fun.
Because I feel like you can get a good bang for your buck when you grow fresh herbs. I mean, that can be the most expensive thing that I'm picking up at the grocery store.
And it's so much better when you cook with them. Yeah.
And they go bad so fast when the time you get them home. You have to use them right away. Yeah, absolutely. When you want to talk about, bang for your buck, fresh herbs are definitely the way to go. Perennial herbs are a fabulous way to sort of fill space, especially sometimes in areas that aren't very fertile, because most of your herbs are really good nutrient scavengers. Chives, for example, if you don't have room to do full-blown onions or even green onions, you can plant a clump of chives. They will grow just about anywhere. They will do well in part sun, and you can divide those clumps and tuck them in all over the place. Edible landscaping is fantastic. You can tuck things that you can eat in and amongst your flower beds and your perennial beds of your other plants. Herbs especially are fantastic for this.
Yeah. The kids like to, as they walk by, I'd rather they pick mint and eat it than the chives, because then everybody smells like an onion. It's stop eating the chives, you guys. They like to eat them raw. And
my kids love eating the chives too. It's always like, someone's been in the chives.
Yeah, especially the flowers. They'll pick the flowers off and eat those. Yeah.
If you get those flowers, have you ever made a chive flower vinaigrette?
Yes.
Yeah.
Soaking it in the vinegar. Oh my gosh, that's my favorite thing I look forward to when the chives finally start to flower. It's I get to make my chive flower vinaigrette. It's just fantastic. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yummy. So delicious soaking those guys.
And a lot of the time too, you can also be using those flowers in your cooking and in your fresh foods, because they oftentimes have the same, if not stronger flavor than the herb that you're actually cooking with. And it gives you sort of a little textural thing. It's also very visually interesting. If you don't have a space where you're actually in-ground gardening, you can still do perennial herbs. You just need to either bring them inside into a protected environment during your coldest part of the season, your coldest part of the winter, or in some way protect the base of those containers. So if you can at least pull it up against a building to give it some protection, or put it into an unheated garage or shed or whatever, that would be fine too. But perennials for sure are a good way to start. And they're usually very, very easy to maintain. If you're doing them in ground, beware anything that is in the mint family. That includes your oregano, marjoram to a lesser extent, but then anything that is a mint, a lemon balm, those types of things, because they will take over whatever space they are in. And once they get out, you can't get them back. So now if you have a spot that you need taken over, if you have an abandoned flower bed or something that nothing else will grow in, throw some lemon balm in there, throw some mint or something, and just sort of keep it edged very well, and it'll fill in nicely. And again, they will flower, and you'll get lots of pretty bees and things going. So, but then also annual herbs too. You can grow herbs that are annuals and allow them to self-seed. So where you actually don't have to worry about restarting them every year and replanting them every year. And which is great because it's one less thing, especially if you're in a short season area. Those seeds are coming up when it's ideal for them. And herbs are fantastic for pots, as long as it's not something that's going to take over the whole container. And usually they won't do it in one season. So I will do a lot of the time for people who have just apartment balconies, combo planters that will have a basil plant in the center, but all around the outside, it will also have an oregano and a mint, which you normally would never put together. But in one season, they're not going to completely take over everything that's in that pot. So yeah, herbs are great to do in containers. And there's a lot of both perennial and annual options.
You can also put them in a pot with your flowers. So if you like to have flowers, I like to have flowers on my deck. I have a big pot that's got flowers and herbs together. Or you can stick a kale right in the middle, a kale in the middle with your flowers kind of trailing down below. It looks really pretty. And there you've got something edible in maybe a pot you would have just had only decorative stuff. So
yeah, and using things that are very aromatic. Aromatic herbs are really good for detracting pests. So if you are sitting on your deck in the evening and you have a bunch of flower pots out there, don't be afraid to stick something in there that is going like a mint or a rosemary or something that is very aromatic that will help keep the mosquitoes away or help to keep, the ants off of your deck. The stronger the scent, the better off you are. And it's just nice to sit out there. It smells beautiful as you're sitting out there, Yeah.
The good thing is it can be an inexpensive endeavor in the beginning. You don't have to have a whole field full of tomato plants. You can start with one or two in a pot, and it can be approachable as a project to start just to see what you think of it and not put out a whole bunch of money to do it.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, we've all seen the meme that floats around that, says, oh, after, 6 months and $400, I'm finally getting to harvest my first 25-cent tomato, or whatever. And it's funny because it's true, but it doesn't have to be, I mean, the whole reason I started, my first garden was to try to save some money. And I did it with the cheap little seed packets that I found at the store. I really do think that it should be cheap. It's one thing if it's a hobby and that is your hobby, because everybody has a hobby that they spend their, sort of disposable income on. It's their thing that they like to do. If you love the way these beautiful raised planters look and these beautiful vertical gardens and fancy trellises and everything else, and that's where you want to spend your money, by all means, do it. I love looking at those gardens. But if you are somebody who is trying to get into gardening to help save some money on your family's food budget, it does not need, nor should it be, expensive, and you can use found materials to create raised beds. You can use repurposed containers. Your biggest expense at that point is going to be what you fill those containers with. If you have any money to spend at all, that's where you should spend it because it goes right back to the soil again.
So something that I saw and I've heard about a lot is if you're building these raised planters, they're fairly deep and it can be a lot of soil. And I've seen a lot of people talking about filling it halfway with sticks and foraged materials before you go and put your high quality soil in, because the whole container doesn't actually have to be a solid mass of this expensive soil. Have you worked with that or experimented with that?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And unless you are planting something that is a very deep rooted perennial, most of your garden vegetables their roots tend to stay in the 4 to 6 inch depth.
Right.
And so that is where you're mostly concerned about the quality of the nutrients and the quality of the soil. You do not need to fill that all the way up with the best, most expensive compost and potting soil that you can find. You're filling in the volume along the bottom. That can be anything. It can be, sticks and twigs and old rotting logs that you have found. It can be leaves. It can be straw, manure or bedding or whatever from other people's, animals, specifically rabbits and goats, because it's not a hot manure. All of those things can be used to fill. The bottoms of these raised planters are open. They're not closed. So they have contact with the native soil.
Even as somebody who's gardened before, I've been stuck in rows and I've been stuck in linear type of thinking where we just do this monocropping that you say, even though we have 10 different vegetables or whatever growing, they're all by themselves. And I think it's changing my mind about how to grow a garden and to make it a a better garden. It doesn't have to be these rows. And
keep it in your head that, this is new. This idea of a linear, very prim and proper, well-designed garden is a more modern idea. If you look back at the ancient gardens in Babylon, these remains that we sort of dig up and see of cultivation from 7,000, 10,000 years ago, it was not like it is now. And everything was sort of tucked in and amongst each other, because that was how things grew in nature. It wasn't until Victorian era there started to be a little bit more of a class separation, that we started to move from the idea of the garden as a source of our sustenance to very prim and proper and linear lines. This was a luxury. This was something to be pretty to look at, or that you had money to pay somebody else to be doing this on your behalf.
Keep it neat and clean.
Keep it neat and clean. Yeah. And then somehow that moved over into the way that we grow things, our agriculture. We started to look at, if I can focus all of my resources on just this one thing, it makes more sense.
Everybody get your gardens going.
Awesome. These are my garden goals for this year. I'm so pumped.
I love it.
What is one thing you wish you could grow in your climate but cannot?
Anything citrus.
All right. How about favorite pie filling?
Cherry.
Oh,
my husband is not a cherry pie guy. He loves apple pie. So I'm 90% of the time I'm making apple pie. But if I have my druthers, it's absolutely cherry pie.
You get the bigger slice.
I do. Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite tool or appliance in your kitchen that you cannot live without?
My stand mixer. It's not even so much for necessarily the mixing, but I love all the attachments that I can put on it. So I've got like the grinder attachment. And what I discovered through another podcast was that you can use the vegetable peeler attachment that goes with it to make very, very short work of canning tomato sauce.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
I see that my mixer has that attachment spot. I've never gone into attachment land.
Yeah, me
because
either.
the basic model didn't come with any other attachments. Ooh, I might have to add this to my Mother's Day gift list.
Yes, I highly recommend.
All right. And do you have a favorite drink after a long, hot day in the garden that you like to kick back with?
I have two. I have my just gin and tonic, but it's not actually tonic. I actually just use lemon flavored seltzer water. But then I also will take, and this is very limited because we don't always have very much of it, our rum top cordial. And I mix that with a little bit of seltzer water, something nice and cold and bubbly, and drink that too. So those are my two favorites.
Well, Karin, we really want to thank you so much for joining us. We have learned an awful lot, and I think our listeners will have as well. And we want everybody to listen to your podcast, because this was barely scratching the surface on these topics. You guys, you need to go and listen to Just Grow Something and join Karin's classes that she's going to be offering and all the things. So Karin, please tell everybody where to find you.
I appreciate that. I had so much fun being here. Thanks you guys for having me on. I am Just Grow Something Podcast. You can find that everywhere. Just Grow Something Podcast is on Instagram, Facebook. We're on TikTok, and I think the YouTube is just Grow Something, but and all that stuff you can find at the website, which is justgrowsomethingpodcast.com.
We really recommend it. Really
go check it out. When you release an episode for the rest of the week, you're kind of pulling out and breaking down some of those important points out of each episode, and I love that because it makes me go back and add those. Oh, right, you said that other thing about growing onions that I wanted to do this year, and then it reminds me so that I don't forget, because I think we can all be easily overwhelmed by all the information. So you do a really great job of breaking that stuff out. It's helping me as a listener and a gardener.
Yay!
Totally.
Yay. I love it.
You're accomplishing your mission, Karin.
That's it. That's what I like to hear.
We are growing things.
Yeah.
And now for the fine print. Join us over on the socials, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Pinterest, and on our website at threekitchenspodcast.com. And remember, when you like, follow, subscribe, and review, it helps more people find us. Thank you so much for listening.
I have serious issues, but